by any means necessary. The worst thing that happens in a democracy is an ignorant politics, don't understand what climate control is all about, don't understand what racism is all about, don't understand what poverty is all about. We talk about it can't get worse. Oh, yes, it can. What do you have to lose? Everything. You know, talk to your children. Make sure they understand that when Fred Gray fought for Martin Luther King, he was fighting for our future. And we have a responsibility to not only keep that fight alive and to honor Fred Gray, but to do what we must do for our children and generations yet unborn. So when we come here tonight, we don't just come to celebrate our past, we come to rededicate ourselves to our future. And if you don't think that we have a struggle, the struggle is far from over. We took a giant step backwards on November the 8th. And some people say, oh no, it's just gonna be another 4 years. You know what? Maybe you don't care about the Supreme Court, or what happened in Plessy versus Ferguson, or what happened earlier than that in Dred Scott. I don't know if you realize Dred Scott has never been formally overturned by the Supreme Court. Do all of you know what the Dred Scott case is? Yes. What is the Dred Scott case? No, it said that black people have no rights that white people are bound to respect. Now, that to me is indicative of what they believe is going to make America great again. And not just black people, but Muslims, progressives, anyone who does not fit that conservative agenda is expendable. So I'm just telling you, I'm not tired of fighting. I don't want to fight, but I do understand that we can't, for example, just send Barbara Lee to Washington. We've got to go there with her. We're going to have to really think about not just marching, but you look at what's going on with major corporations. Major corporations have lost any sense of affirmative action, not just because of Prop 9 in California, or 209, I should say, but the idea that we ought to be inclusive, that we ought to be about diversity, we ought to be about making sure that everyone feels welcome in our society seems to be something that is no longer in vogue. And I just think we got to start talking about holding everybody accountable. The private sector, the public sector, elected officials, everyone. I don't know the last time you ever called Oakland City Hall, City Hall. I can tell you the last time I called Oakland City Hall, I didn't get a call back. I said, this is the former mayor. They can say everything but I give up. Because they didn't care. And if they don't care that I'm calling, they probably don't care if you call them. And so it starts right here at home, folks. You know, we got to really hold everybody accountable. We've got to make sure our young people understand the legacy and the responsibility that not only goes with voting, but goes with the democracy. So when we listen to Fred Gray tonight, hopefully we'll not only remember the sacrifice that he made, and the question that we have to ask that he's going to help us to answer is, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? One of the stories that I always love was the story about Fannie Lou Hamer told a long time ago about an old lady in a small town. And everybody in that town thought that old lady knew everything about everything. She had the answer to any question. So some young boys went up to the old lady and they said, we're going to fool her. So we're going to hold a bird in our hand and we're going to ask her if the bird is alive or dead. And when she says it's alive, we're going to crush it in our hand and she'll be wrong. And she says it's dead, we're going to let it go and let it fly. In any case, she'll still be wrong. So he went up to her and said, ma'am, we have a bird in our hand. You're supposed to know so much, I want to ask you a question. Is that bird alive or is it dead? She looked him each in the eye. She said, it's in your hands. It's in your hands. Thank you very much.
Sounds like Elihu should be running for an office again. But one of the other comments that most notably said by Fannie Lou Hamer was about that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's a comment that I think we all have to embrace in terms of we go forward. I'd like to just say that, look, times appear to be difficult now, but I should always remember what Fred Gray did, what our forefathers did, and times were difficult for them as well. And so we have to do as they did, and that is stay focused and keep working hard at it. And things do change. And it's up to us to bring about the change that we want, and that can be done. I mean, I've been in as much despair as anyone can be in terms of the election. I guess I might say I was in mourning, and it's taken me a few days, more than a few days, to come out from under it. But I have to come from under it. And being here tonight with all of you, all of us having the same view that we have to energize ourselves, energize our young people, and move forward and deal with the facts that are before us. And as Elihu says, we all have to be involved. And I think this is certainly an effort on our part to understand what the problems are and to involve ourselves in moving forward in a very positive way. So in that sense, it's a positive thing that we're all here tonight. Now let me continue with the program. I'd like now at this time to bring forward the Director of Government and External Affairs in the Freedom Center, Dr. Karen Boki. And a couple of young people with her, of course.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. David and I are grateful to represent our youth team from the Freedom Center. First, we would like to thank our incredible staff, Ms. Jana Fisher, Kiona Parcell-Ruse, Mitt Lepcha, Myra Perez, Mr. Royal Roberts, Dr. Karen Bolke, and our director, Dr. Roy Wilson. Give our staff a hand. Let me address a few things. In our classes and civic engagement projects, we carry out our work in ways that plant seeds for building strong organizations. It is our view that no matter how many individuals agree with the principles of justice, we cannot achieve success without strong organizations. Regarding the state of this country, we believe that Dr. King's words are clear. He says, "When a new dawn reveals a landscape dotted with obstacles, the time has come for sober reflection, for assessment of our methods and anticipating pitfalls. Stumbling and groping through the wilderness finally must be replaced by a planned, organized, and orderly march. It is time to move forward. That time is now. We need organizations that are responsible, efficient, and alert. We need organizations that know how to get from here to there. Dr. King teaches to attempt radical reform without adequate organization is like trying to sail a boat without a rudder. Leadership is the rudder. Organization is the boat. We lack experience because ours is a history of disorganization. We will prevail because our need for progress is stronger than our tendency to be spontaneous. We can create, as we've done before, militant organizations. Our people created underground railroads, remarkable boycotts, strong self-help societies, powerful protests, and popular-based organization that has been our refuge. It is a great day to organize. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I agree with Erica and Dr. Wilson. Tonight, we are in the right place at the right time. Erica spoke briefly about the role of organization. Let me say a few words about individual character and responsibility in regards to organizing our future. First, Dr. King bluntly states, one of the sure signs of maturity is the ability to rise to the point of self-criticism. At the Freedom Center, our classes and civic engagement projects focus on individual change for personal and social responsibility. Unfortunately, our schools and other societal structures produce too much defensiveness. For some of us, we can't even handle someone saying, "Your fly's unzipped," let alone giving a suggestion on how to better put forth our nobler side. Next, I want to mention our collective addiction to comfort. At one time, not that long ago, our people held the belief that the most important thing in life was work and contributing to family and community. Today, we seem stuck in a self-destructive drive for constant comfort. Dr. King insists that every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, struggle, and suffering. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Dr. King said something else worthy of repeating tonight. Nothing could be more tragic than for men to live in these revolutionary times and fail to achieve the new attitude and the new mental outlooks that the new situation demands. We cannot get out of this situation by escaping into the various realms of comfort. We have to let some of our entertainment go. Let it go. We will have to let some of our just hanging out time dwindle and fill it up with meaningful, disciplined, and sustained work. A better world is possible. A better America is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, David. Whew. I knew it was going to be important to be together tonight. I had no idea it would be under the conditions that we're under, but we're here, and we're here for the right reasons. David and Erica and I have the job of asking all of us to be a part of supporting our young people at the Freedom Center, and I do our government and external relations work, and you know, several of us have mentioned the work of our Congresswoman this evening. I have had the privilege of traveling with our young people, with the Congresswoman, in many, many settings. And let me tell you, there is nothing that brings her more joy, and all of us more joy, than to know that these very same young people are speaking to the Congressional Black Caucus. They are speaking to bipartisan members of Congress on congressional pilgrimages to Selma and Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama, discussing very difficult issues. Our Congresswoman has a very difficult task, and she's relying on all of us in this room, and she's relying on the young people of the Freedom Center. Now, we cannot do this work alone. That's one of our messages tonight, and as I'm speaking, I'm gonna ask you all to please take out this little card and the envelope. We're gonna vote tonight, and we all need to vote, so please take out your cards. This is how we're gonna ask us all to vote. We're going to vote for organization. We're going to vote for young people. We're going to vote for voice. And we're going to vote for militant organizations that are sustainable, that are disciplined. And the Freedom Center has the outrageous responsibility of working not just with our young people, but with interracial, intergenerational circles of us to do this social change work. So we're going to ask 3 things tonight. First, will you make a donation? Please. Will you consider cash, a check, or a credit card? And our bookkeeper, Jenna Fisher, is going to be selling books up here tonight. If you prefer to see her with your credit card, she can do that as well. And secondly, we're going to ask all of us tonight to consider giving of some of our time for the Freedom Center. And on this card, you're going to see a couple of different places where you can either make that donation tonight or pledge it. There's other ways that you can give, but there's also ways that you can give of your time. And we're going to ask you to take a minute right now to fill this out. Young people, if you could start coming forward. If you didn't get a card right now, please raise your hand. Come on forward with the baskets and the cards. And the people that have their hands up, young people, if you could get them cards. And in a few minutes, we'll collect them back up. Now, it's holiday season. I want to say a word about holiday season, but first let me just say that this summer I did have the privilege of traveling with our young people in the Central Valley, where we knocked on 7,000 doors in 110-degree weather for 5 weeks, made all of our own meals, registered folks to vote. This team of young people is hot when it comes to democracy, voter engagement, and voter education. And we're dedicating ourselves this next year to voter education and voter engagement. Please join us. Please join us. So a special request, because it's the holiday season and you're all going to be with your loved ones at dinners and in house gatherings and office gatherings, will you consider turning those events into opportunities to tell people about the Freedom Center? Consider gift giving in the name of the Freedom Center this holiday season. And with that, we are going to have our young people pass baskets. And if you are willing to contact our offices and have the young people or myself follow up with you on this request, please put a star on that little form, and I will call you. One of the staff will call you. And with that, we thank you for your generosity. As the music gets going, let me also let folks know there's a little 3x5 card in your envelope. Those are for asking questions of Mr. Fred Gray. If you have a question you would like to ask of him while he's speaking tonight, please write that question down and turn it into the basket, and we will forward them to him as well. Thank you.
There's a train a-comin'. You don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to it be Susan. You don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord, yeah. People get ready for the train to Jordan, picking up passengers from coast to coast. Faith is the key, open the doors and board them. There's room for all of the love and honesty, yeah, yeah. Now there ain't no room for the hopeless sinner who's hard on mankind just to save his own. Have pity on those whose chances are thinner, 'cause there's no hiding
Thank you, thank you. As you all know, freedom is not free, so it's important that you all contribute and contribute as generously as you can. The Freedom Forum Freedom Center is doing a lot of good work, and you can see that some of the travels that take place amongst the youth. They go to various centers as well as work around the area that it costs to do. So to the extent that you can contribute, I know that we all have great demands on us, particularly just finishing up a political campaign where I'm sure most of you have had to contribute more money than you would have liked to, particularly in a losing cause, but you still have to contribute. Time goes on, and we have to keep moving forward and deal with the issues that are before us, and helping young people is probably one of the most important things we can, in fact, do. So at this time, I'm going to bring on Robert Harris. Robert Harris is a lawyer, retired lawyer, I might say, who worked many years for PG&E, has been the president of the National Bar Association, which is the largest black bar in the nation. He has and was the president at a very, very young age. Given how he looks now, you might think it's a little bit different, but he has been an outstanding lawyer and real contributor to many of the civil rights organizations that have been involved, and certainly involved with Barbara Lee and her staff and all. So it is my honor and great pleasure to bring forward my friend Robert Harris to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Let's hear it again for John Burris is one of our most outstanding civil rights lawyers here in the United States. Let's hear it again for John. I have a very easy task to introduce our speaker. But before I do, I'm from Arkansas, and I was taught a long time ago, protocol. I want to introduce you to the First Lady, Carol Gray. You can see where Fred gets his motivation. I have had the opportunity over the years to introduce Fred. As a matter of fact, I've introduced him throughout the world. Focus for a moment. Here's a man at 25 years old, right out of law school, represents Rosa Parks. Not only that, goes over to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery and represents Martin Luther King Jr. What man of man is this? Fred Gray, at age 28, almost 29, but still 28, walks to that high court, the United States Supreme Court, 28 years old, and says, Mr. Chief Justice, may it please the court, my name is Fred Gray from Montgomery, Alabama, and I am here on behalf of Dr. Gomillion. Those were his words. He was representing in the case of Gomillion versus Lightfoot, which turns out to be a landmark case that set the ground for all voting rights in this nation. This man, Fred Gray. I could go on and on because I get emotional about Fred. I've known him for almost 40 years. Glenda, Carol, Fred, and I, along with the National Bar, have traveled, as I said earlier, throughout the world. One scene, before I ask him to come up, I want to set for you. 3 years ago, we were in Paris. One would think that Fred Gray in Paris, who would know Fred Gray in Paris? The National Bar sponsors a conference, a seminar, and more than 40 lawyers out of Paris comes just to sit, question, and listen to this giant. He's a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. Any Omegas here tonight? Now I see one. And of course, he is a member of Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, the Boule. And I know I have some members here tonight. But ladies and gentlemen, there is no other person alive today who has dedicated himself more to the cause of civil rights. Were it not for Fred Gray, many of the freedoms that we think we enjoy today, we would not enjoy. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you and bring to you the legendary Fred D. Gray, Tuskegee, Alabama.
Thank you very much. They tell me introductions like that is somewhat like liniment. It's good to rub on, but not to take in. To the moderator, those members of the judiciary that may be here. As a lawyer, you always have to remember about judges. To the persons whose this series of lectures is named after, and I got a call this afternoon from Congressman Lee indicating her inability to be here, but expressed her regrets, but she's taking care of business elsewhere. To the sponsors of this program and those of you who over the years have supported it, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank my longtime friend Bob Harris for his introduction. We have traveled around, half around the world, and I am very, very thankful for him and for his leadership. It is not every day that I'm introduced by a person who has been the president or chief executive officer of 3 national organizations. I met him first at the National Bar Association, and he was president of that association, and as a result of what he did and others, it inspired me to run for president. He is a past Grand Provost Marshal of the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and he's a past Psi Archon, Grand Psi Archon of Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, of which I have the privilege of serving as a member. So I'm very happy, and I'm thankful to Bob, and I'm thankful for his wife, Linda, who's a doctor. When we were on one of our trips to Europe, I had an accident, and she took care of me, and I appreciate that. I want to thank Dr. Wilson, who has really coordinated this whole thing and is instrumental in helping to get us here. And I want to also thank, I think it's Mr. Roberts who worked with him. And as I see in our audience Tom Broom, a past president of the National Bar Association. We're happy to have Tom here. He's had some health challenges, but God has blessed him and he's able to be here. And I didn't know whether he was going to make it or not, so I called him this afternoon just in case, because he succeeded me as president of the National Bar Association, and we're very happy that he's here. And of course, Bob has already told you about Carol. Both of us, these are second marriages for us. And both of us had been married to our first spouse by a long period of time, and that spouse died. And afterwards, we met each other at a church function, and we are now working on 15 years of marriage. We also have another person, other persons in our audience. Dr. Hopper and his wife are back there. They're former residents of Tuskegee, and it's good to see them and good that they're here. And I know there are some other persons I should have acknowledged. So those of you who I should have acknowledged and didn't acknowledge, I acknowledge you, and I'm thankful that you're here. And thankful for every one of you who have come this evening, because you could be spending your Saturday afternoon some other place, but you decided to come to listen to a lawyer from Tuskegee, Alabama. When I'm invited to speak to groups, and a week ago I was in Nashville, Tennessee, at Lipscomb University, a university that I sued, and a university that later conferred a doctor's degree on me, and a university that later decided to enter into a memorandum of understanding with me and do a lot of things to improve race relations. And this time last week, was attending an event where they had at that institution an academic program entitled Lipscomb Institute of Law, Justice, and Society. A year ago, for reasons best known to themselves, they decided to change the name to have a big dinner with about 500 people present, and initiated the Fred D. Gray Institute for Law, Justice, and Society. When I thought about becoming a lawyer a long time ago, I never even ever dreamed of anything like that happening. But when I'm invited to speak to occasions like this, and particularly when you have to come all the way across country, I at least like to inquire of the persons who invite me, what in the world do you want me to talk about? Now, I don't promise them that I'm going to talk about what they tell me. I do promise them, however, Madam President, and we really appreciate you. We had an opportunity of going by. The first thing, when I heard about this M.L. King Center, I wanted to see what it was all about. And before we got to the hotel, we went by and saw it, and we've learned something from it. I've learned something about it. And I look forward to working out a relationship between the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center and the Martin Luther King Center for Freedom. But I usually ask people, what do you want me to talk about? And I did that. and this is some of the things they said they wanted me to talk about. Make a tie between what it took to make the gains experienced by the civil rights organizations and the people from the late 1950s through the 1970s with what you see and should be the focus for American people today. That was one thing they said they wanted me to talk about. There's more. They would like for me to express my opinions as to why young people, particularly young lawyers and other professionals, should become actively involved in civil rights activities. That's another big item. There's more. Discuss important to Wilson. I'm mindful that the lecture is 11 days after the election, and many will be seeking that we go from here, coerce our community. Well, that's a big order. And to do it in the time that would be reasonable is almost impossible. However, and I didn't make a commitment that I was going to do it, but what I'm going to try to do in the next however long it takes me is to do several things. One, give you a historical perspective on why it became necessary for African Americans to fight so hard for so long in order to obtain their constitutional rights. And I think that's particularly true because we've had to do it for a long time and we still complete it. Secondly, I need to tell you just a little in the civil rights. I got involved in it. A lot of people involved in the civil rights movement for various reasons, and some in it. But I have to, for you to understand what I did and why I have the passion I have for it. Say a little something about that. And, you think about a young lawyer, and they asked me to deal with these young professionals and let them know why they need to be involved in it. I think I need to discuss with you what this young professional did. And I can think of no better example than the one that I'm probably known best for. That's the Montgomery bus boycott. And it's appropriate that we discuss that because 2 weeks from now, we will be celebrating the 61st anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. And many people consider, even the historians, that that event was really the beginning of what has become known as the modern civil rights movement. Let me, I hope, briefly tell you how we got involved in this why we need to be here today and why we still have to work. This country, the United States of America, is considered the melting pot of the world. People from around the world have come to this country for various types of freedom: economic, political, social, and otherwise. However, with respect to African Americans, we and our foreparents were the only group that came, well, we didn't come, we were brought to this country, and we were brought against our will. Why was it necessary to have a civil rights movement in the first place? If this country were true to its heritage And if it, in fact, believed that when the Constitution was originally adopted that all men are created equal, and as is stated therein, we the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, there would have been no need for a civil rights movement, because all of the persons in the United States of America, including African Americans, would have been completely equal and free in the first place. But as we all know, that just didn't happen. As you know, or should know, we the people, in the preamble to the Constitution as originally written and as originally adopted, did not include people who look like me. The drafters of the Constitution and even the drafters of the Declaration of Rights and Grievances and the Declaration of Independence as originally adopted were not concerned about the rights of minorities, and certainly they weren't concerned about the rights of black people. They were only concerned about white Americans, and then they were only concerned about the rights of white male Americans. Even white females did not have the right to vote. And when I started practicing law in Alabama, females couldn't even serve on juries, only males. So then, it became necessary for the adoption of amendments to the Constitution and the passage of additional laws to provide African Americans with any rights. You know them. The 13th Amendment adopted, abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment adopted, made African American citizens, and extended to them the due process and equal protection of the laws. And now there are more white people who obtain their rights under the 14th Amendment than black people, because it's more of them than it is us. And then the 15th Amendment, of course, prohibited the denial of voting rights. That should have ended the question, and we should have been able to vote, but it didn't. We had to go and continue to do it. We also know that the wrong to be corrected preceded the adoption of the Constitution. It started when the first slaves landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. So then, when we were brought here as slaves, we had a great deal of problems all along, and even after slavery had ended, there were other problems that still exist. And you would think that segregation in public schools started and trying to get rid of it in southern states, but that's not true. Segregation in public school was approved by the Massachusetts Supreme Court in 1850 in the Sarah Roberts case. Then there was the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which in effect held that ancestors of slavery were not citizens and could not file a lawsuit. And it is probably best known as saying that a white person had no rights, or a black person had no rights that a white person had to respect. For the past 62 years, I have devoted my time and my effort using the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment to the Constitution for the purpose of doing away with that. I think now I have at least, why we needed to have a civil rights movement. And I've heard a lot of our people, particularly a lot of young professionals, good paying jobs, who know nothing at all about hardcore segregation and don't even know how or why they are where they are. And if anybody should be interested in civil rights, it's black young professionals because you are where you are, not that you are so smart, but you have to be smart to be there, but because somebody else laid the foundation so that you will be able to have the benefits of it. Now let me tell you briefly how I became involved in the civil rights movement. And I'm going to go through a lot of things here, and I hope I go through enough that you won't have any questions. Because the main question you want to ask me when it's all over is how to solve the problems now. And I can tell you right now, I'm not going to tell you. But in any event, I became involved in the civil rights movement. I grew up as a teenager in the 40s. I was born in 1930. And in Alabama, for a black boy to have a profession, there was only two real good professions that you could look forward to being, or having, or engaging in. It's what? To be a teacher. I used to baptize cats, and so they sent me to. We had a church school, the Church of Christ did up in Nashville, school up there, a boarding school, and I was sent up to learn how to be a preacher. Probably one way of raising funds and soliciting students, an example. So let's get up and speak before we. And so I learned a little something about preaching. I finished early. In Alabama State, the and in those days, very few people who looked like me had automobiles, so we had to use public. There was only one black lawyer in Montgomery. But to make a long story short, I opened my office. And you know about Mrs. Rosa Parks, and you know about Dr. King, and you know something a little bit about the Montgomery bus boycott. But just keep in mind, and I'll talk with you about it a little later. And I want you to remember, some of you have been talking ever since March the 2nd, that Claudette, months before, without any training, any preparation, or anything else, and not knowing what was going to happen after she did what she did. Since it is that incident, that's why I want to talk with you a little bit and tell you what this young lawyer did in Montgomery, Alabama, a few months before the Montgomery bus boycott. And then I want to talk with you a little bit about what I did, and it wasn't just me, I did it in conjunction with others afterwards. Because the things that took place, and you read about the Montgomery bus boycott, and you have a center named after Dr. Martin Luther King, and most of you don't even know how he got to where he was. All you know is that he was the pastor, and he ended up leading the boycott. Let me tell you about what happened in Montgomery. I knew and conferred with Mr. E.D. Nixon. Now remember the name. If you ever think about the Montgomery bus boycott, and you can't think about civil rights in Montgomery unless you think about E.D. Nixon, because E.D. Nixon was a Pullman car porter who had been working on civil rights in Montgomery for years before December of 1955. He was a personal friend of ours. As a matter of fact, his wife was a member of the same church that I was a member of, Hope Street Church of Christ in Montgomery. And she used to teach me when I was just a little tot in the Sunday school class. So we knew him. And when I came back to go to college, I saw Mr. Nixon, And if any person of color had a problem, they would always want to, if it's a racial problem, they'd go to Mr. Nixon because he would be the one to do it. He had been president of the branch of the Montgomery, of the NAACP, had been president of the state conference of branches. So I established a working relationship with him, and he encouraged me to be a lawyer, and he was always looking for lawyers. So it was important, and he played a major role in the movement. Secondly, I knew Mrs. Rosa Parks before December 1st, 1955. Ms. Parks had been working in civil rights also with Mr. Nixon for years before then. And her husband had been working in connection with the Scottsville boys all the way back in the 30s. So she had a background in and was personally concerned. And when I was a student at Alabama State, and she was youth director and secretary of the Montgomery branch, I became a member and got to be a very good, close friend to hers. So she was very interested in me becoming a lawyer and very interested in me becoming successful. Third, there was a lady named Joanne Robinson, who was a professor of English at Alabama State at the time and had had a bad experience on the buses as far back as 1949. She is now, in 1955, chairman of the Women's Political Council, which was an organization of black women. Most of them were teachers at Alabama State, and their whole purpose was to improve the conditions of African Americans, and particularly young African Americans. Then there's Claudette Carvin. Claudette was a 15-year-old girl who lived in a section of Montgomery that was surrounded by whites, and all the black kids, and there's only about 3 or 4 streets up there that they lived on, they had to use the public transportation system. So they'd have to ride downtown, transfer, get a bus, come back. She was sitting on the seat on March the 2nd, 1955, not in the reserved 10 seats for whites, but she was asked to get up. There were more people who came on the bus. And as a result of that, she was arrested. E.D. Nixon recommended me to her parents. I represented her. We started and talked about a bus boycott then. We didn't do it. They talked us out of it. But she was my first client and the first one that I represented and raised the issue. They claimed that she was a delinquent, but she wasn't a delinquent. She was an honored student. They wanted to enforce the segregation laws. And then there's another thing. You know, women have played, I talked about young people, women have played a major role in the civil rights movement. On October the 30th, 1955, and that's about a little better than a month before Mrs. Parks did what she did, I was invited by the 10 times 1 is 10 clubs. That was one of the federated women clubs that was connected with Dorothy Height. That most of you ladies know a little something about that. But anyway, they were celebrating then their 67th anniversary in Tillabody Auditorium at Alabama State University, and they invited this young lawyer to come and speak to them. And guess what he said? And if you don't believe it, get a copy of Bus Ride to Justice. It's on page 37 and 38. This is what you read. This is what you see. And this is what I told them. This is important because all of these things happened in Montgomery before the bus boycott started and before Mrs. Parks did what she did. And I'll only read a little bit of it. We must be alert. We must be diligent. We must not accept anything less than full integration in public schools, public transportation, and in all other facilities. Let us forever remember that segregated schools and segregation itself is inherently unequal. It creates an inferiority complex upon our children. I was referring to Brown versus the Board of Education that just had been decided about a year before. We must be strong, we must be financially able and willing to carry our cases to court if our officials will not voluntarily desegregate our schools, parks, transportation system, and all other facilities. Now let me ask you something. Can you imagine a 24-year-old lawyer talking to these women who could be old enough to be his mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, and telling them, and many of them were teachers in segregated schools, telling them what they had to do and what they ought to do about ending segregation. But you know what? They didn't criticize me. Instead, they ended up supporting the bus boycott. Now, what I have shown you, these events, the events involving E.D. Nixon, involving Rosa Parks, involving Joanne Robinson, involving Claudette Colvin, involving these women at the 10 times 1 is 10 Club, all of that led up to and helped us be successful in beginning the bus boycott. So what I say to you young lawyers, as you start, and those of you who are interested in civil rights or anything else, you can't do it by yourself. You're going to have to find people, one, who are more experienced than you are, who's working in the field, and do it. Now let me tell you 2 or 3 other things, and then I know my time is passing. But let me tell you a couple of things that happened on and after December 1st of 1955. First of all, on December 1st at noon, I had my usual luncheon with Miss Parks. She worked at a department store a block and a half from my office, and every day for about a year since I started practicing law, for lunchtime, she would come to my office, we'd share our little lunches, and we would eat, and we'd talk about things. We talked about the conditions, how bad schools were, and how bad segregation was. We talked about what a person should and should not do if the opportunity, if you want to call it that, or if you are confronted with a situation where you are asked to give up your seat on the bus. So she knew what to do. And then we ended that meeting, and before I told her that I had to go out of town that day, and she ended up going back to her work, and I went out of town. When I got back in town shortly after 6 o'clock, I had phone calls from everybody, including one from Ms. Parks, who had been arrested. I called her, she asked me to come over to her house. And these are the events that happened on December the 1st, which took place without which there may not have been not at that time. When I went, Ms. Parks told me about what had happened, and I told her, and she wanted me to represent her. I told her that's fine. She said the case is on Monday. Now this is Thursday evening late. I said, well, don't worry about your case, because we're going to take care of that. Well, I knew to begin with that Ms. Parks' case wasn't going to take long. I was going to raise my little federal issues. The judge was going to rule against me. He's going to convict her. We decided Robinson was really the off of the bus for one day as a protest. Parks' house had me to the Carvins. He had gotten Mrs. Parks out of jail. I went back to give him a report on the fact that I was all set to take care of her case, and told him that we need to keep people off, see if we can get them to stay off of the bus on Monday. He says, fine. I said, I'm going to go over to Joanne Robinson's house, get in my car, go to Joanne. We sit in her living room. And the first thing we concluded, and I said, well, don't worry about Miss Parks' case, I'm going to take care of that. The first thing we need to do, we need to try to get the people to stay off of the bus one day as a protest. So everything else we're going to do right now is going to deal with that. She said, well, that's fine. I'm in favor of that. I said, well, number one, if we're going to get folks to stay off of the buses, we got to get a message out. And as soon as we get through talking, I'll prepare some leaflets to go out. But how are we going to get it to the people? I said, well, we know all the preachers in town. We get in touch with the president of the Ministerial Association. On Sunday, we have these leaflets ready and tell the people to stay off of the buses. That's fine. I said, but now, if you're going to ask people to stay off the bus for a day, we really wanted them to stay off until they could do it on a non-segregated basis. But we can't tell them that then. So we decided what we'll do is we got to get us a spokesman. Somebody's going to have to speak for us. Normally, E.D. Nixon would have been that person. But there was another black leader in town whose name was Rufus Lewis. He had been a coach at Alabama State, owned a nightclub that was a citizens club, and in order to be a member, you had to be a registered voter. He had some followers. E.D. Nixon had followers. We wanted both of their followers. And knowing our people as we do sometimes, we decided, why don't we get somebody else to be the spokesman and then give those two persons good supporting roles? Joanne Robinson says, fine, I know who the spokesman ought to be. She said, my minister, Dr. King, haven't been here long, haven't been involved in civil rights activities. Nobody hardly know him except members at Dexter. But one thing he can do, and that can move men. He can move people with words. I said, fine, let me then tell you what these other two men need to have, because they need key supporting roles if we're going to have this. Supporters Union knew A. Philip Randolph, the black. He could get him to help raise some money, make him the treasurer, and getting people to the polls, and then has his wife, thank God for the wives, good ones, owner of the largest funeral home in town, in order to transfer people where they got to go. But I want you to know that the problems that we have today are the same problems we had then, and they're not going to go away by themselves. And I've met several of you, and our professionals need to know themselves, but for others. They're involved in the civil rights movement. Their lives depend on the sit-in demonstration, which resulted in the passage of a long way. We have made us need to work together, and I'm through. Not with all the gains we've made, the struggle where we are now. Then, as we meet here to review and the roots from which we have come, the question is, where do we go from here? The history of the civil rights movement needs to be preserved, and that's part of what you're doing in your center. It is also part of what we are doing in Tuskegee with the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center. And as I indicated to you, we hope we can establish a good relationship here with you. And we know this is a fundraiser for the center, but we also need some funds for the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center in Tuskegee. And if you're interested in that, after it's over, you see me and we'll talk about that. There's enough to go around, and all of us can help to see that it is done and properly done. The struggle for equal justice has not ended. Racial discrimination in this country has not ended. We do not have a level playing field. There is no such thing as a race-neutral society in America. The consequences of over 350 years of slavery, segregation, and discrimination has not disappeared in the last 60 years. The struggle for equal justice continues. And you know what? If you don't help to solve it, it won't be solved. So that we may have an impact, both in America and worldwide, I want to suggest to you this evening 4 things, and then I'm through. One, and I think we need to recognize this, but this is in just about every speech I make. And recently, believe it or not, while I have more people here tonight that look like me than usual, the 400 or 500 people who were in Nashville last week, only about 7% of them look like me. And I told them the same thing about what we need to do to solve these problems, and this is what I think. And you asked my opinion, so I'm going to give it to you. One, we need to recognize that racism is still alive in this country and is wrong. Some of our own young folks who are reaping the benefit of people who gave their lives for the civil rights movement think that we've made it. But I think that there are people now who realize with the killing, one, of young black males, but that's not unusual, that's been going on for a long time. But with the killing of some white police officers, and particularly when it happens that a black person does it, and then with the killing by a white person of black people in a church who people are just worshiping God, they are almost to conclude now that maybe racism in this country is a problem. Because if you don't think it's a problem, you'll never solve it. The second thing is, it's not going to go away by itself. It's been with us ever since slavery came. We're going to have a plan. The bus boycott didn't just happen, it was planned. The Selma to Montgomery March didn't just happen, it was planned. The students who started up at A&T, the sit-in demonstrations, it didn't just happen, it was planned. All of these things were planned. And if we're going to ever, and this country has never really lived up to or really faced and tried to solve the race problem, we're going to have to come up with a plan to do it. And once you have a plan is no good if you don't do what? Execute it. You're going to have to execute it. And every one of us would like to one day just wake up and racism would be all over. Everybody love everybody. Everybody's doing everything they're supposed to do just right. But it ain't going to happen that way. It's not. The fourth thing is each one of us individually going to have to do something about it. Those of us who are older and those of us who are younger. In order to do away with racism in this country, it's going to need to start at the top. The White House needs to announce that racism is wrong. It needs to come all the way down from the administration to the courts, to the legislature, to our clubs and social groups and all of these things, because it is so ingrained that it's going to take help from every source we can. And whatever you young people decide to do, just remember that whatever your profession is, you are going to be able to, and you need to enter the profession, not because you'll make a whole lot of money, but you need to realize that you need to render service. I've told you the problems that we have today, we've had for some time. But those of us who are in positions, who have made it, who have been able to move out of the ghetto into another part of the area, into an integrated area, you need to remember from whence you have come. You need to remember that there are still young people in those communities that you and your parents used to live in who need your help. And they'll see that you live in now. But you're going to have to go back into those communities and help those individuals realize that their lives are worth living. We must show that to whom much is given, much is required. For those of us who have been in the profession for years, we must take time to pass the torch of the mantle to the younger generation so that these young men and women will be able to face the challenges before them. These challenges include racism, economic and political disenfranchisement, the lack of adequate health care, human indignities in public schools, institutions of higher learning, the corporate and business world, and in individual neighborhoods. We must seek to instill in these young people that they have lives that is worth living and their dreams too can become true. The problems we have today are the same ones. But we must remember what people do now, they'll tell you that they are equal employer. But when you look at it, the same people are at the top, and we are still the last hired and the first to be fired. We must know from, and we have known from early years, that police brutality was wrong. Not only then, but it's unlawful. But what we have seen develop over the last 5 years, I think we now are beginning to realize that we really have a serious problem. We must encourage these young people, and I'm about through now, to have an optimistic spirit, recognize opportunities when they occur, seek the help when needed, accept the advice, and never stop learning, never stop dreaming, grab hold to a star, and great things can happen. And who knows, you might even start a movement before you know it. Our challenge to ourselves is to leave here tonight, equip him to succeed, each one brother or young sister. Let me leave you with the words of Governor Wilder, the first African-American governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, when he was being installed as the governor some years ago now. While he was speaking to young people, it is applicable to all of us. And this is what he said: I want them to know that opposition can be lifted, that discrimination can be eliminated, that poverty need not be binding, that disability can be overcome, and that the offer of opportunities in a free society carries with it the requirements of hard work, the rejection high, and a willingness to work with others, whatever their race or nationality may be. Thank you and good evening.
Force of his, most important thing is that the unsung heroes, the people who were there, who didn't get the publicity, that were not out front, but who were actually the backbone of what was being done. And I think the true lesson for all of us to understand is that one person cannot do it. It really does require the gathering of different forces, different interest groups, all working together with a common ideal involved. And I think that your illustration of that in the early civil rights movement is something that we all should take heed from. I also would say this, that Mr. Gray, you've been relatively modest in talking about all the great work that you did, because there are many cases that occurred in the 1960s and 70s that bear your footprints on, that it clearly changed the scope and the impact of the civil rights movement, which we all should be and are eternally grateful. He did not talk much about an event that I think that we all should and may not even know, is that he represented Martin Luther King, Dr. King, in a tax evasion case, a perjury case that could really have changed the whole direction of Dr. King's life if a different result had been obtained. And Mr. Gray was at the centerpiece of that representation and really, again, helped change the scope of history with the representation, his participation. That's one case. And also one of the most significant cases that we have to deal with, and that is the libel case of New York Times versus Sullivan, which really goes to the whole question of making statements about public figures and discussed almost routinely, daily, but he was at the forefront of that particular case as well. We all remember Vivian Malone and the integration of the University of Alabama and George Wallace's role in that. Mr. Gray was at the center of all of that activity. And so there are countless cases, including the discrimination, desegregation cases. And on a personal note, my wife is here as a law professor at North Carolina Central Law School, and Mr. Gray was a visiting professor there for over a year, and really had a dramatic impact on the students there, as they got also to see history being unfolding from a man who had actually lived that history. And you can all see that he is still very much engaged in the life today, and has a clear message for all of us, young and old, as to what can be done and should be done in moving the social agenda. So we should be thankful. Let me I'd like for you all to give him another round of applause for his great effort. Now, Mr. Gray, you indicated that you felt that if you had, once you had given your talk, that there would not be any questions that would be asked of you, because they would all have been answered during the course of your lecture. Well, that's almost true, but not quite. And so, and we did get some questions. I thought one that's most interesting, and there were a lot of questions, and I can only answer a couple given the time of the day and what has been happening. But question that came here is, what is your sense in the impact of Black Lives Movement in promoting social justice? Is it a positive force or not?
You know, what has happened over the years, you have various situations that develop, and then people give them a title. Now, when you talk about what's the term again?
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, you see, what I've been doing for the last 62 years, every case that I filed, beginning with Claudette Carvin case, with Rosa Parks case, with Dr. King's tax case, with the Selma to Montgomery March case, with the case against the University of Alabama, Auburn University, the whole State Board of Education to desegregate all the public schools. All of that was doing what they're talking about doing. It was being done. I think what we do, and there's nothing wrong with, it's good to get a little nice, snappy term, because it's easy for people to associate with. But all it's doing is simply doing the same thing we have been doing before. And if they can take social media, and if they can take some technology that we didn't have then, use it. but the object is the same. The purpose is the same, and that is to give to African Americans and all of our citizens the same rights and privileges that white Americans have always had, and that's what it's all about.
Thank you, thank you. One of the things that you didn't talk much about, but I think a question comes about, and that is alliances and associations that helped in many ways with the work that you were involved in, and many of them were white lawyers, white judges, et cetera. Could you give some sense about who was instrumental in helping to formulate some of the positions that you took down through the years?
Well, what I did, and of course, you have a lot of organizations now who are working in the civil rights field. And a lot of them are there for different reasons. And I don't question any motive. As long as we can get something done, then it's fine. I accept the good part that they do, the bad parts I just forget about. But the best thing I did was to recognize I needed help. And when I called Thurgood Marshall, I established a relationship with the NAACP on the national level. And then later when the NAACP Legal Defense Fund was formed. And I have had that sort of relationship with them ever since. But now you have a lot of other groups, and even in Alabama, we have some groups who said that they are working on these civil rights matters, and some do. And some select certain ones, and some select others. Those who will work on any aspect. This racism is so ingrained till it takes everything in order to do it. That's, so what I'm really saying is that all these groups need to try to get together to get some things done. I was just reading, I think, an email that I received from the Joint Center in Washington, D.C., where that center, along with the Hispanic group, had a meeting this past week with the transition team to let them know that you need to include minorities in the employment of these thousands of workers that the administration is going to be hiring, and they need to include minorities. So we need to, and in our individual communities, if we were ever able, and this was true in Alabama, if we were ever able to get the white poor folks in Alabama, and there's more of them than there's black poor folks in Alabama, to realize that our problems are the same thing, and our enemies are the same thing. But what the other side has done is told them that they are better than we are so that they can at least look on something. But if all of us get together and work together, we'd solve these problems.
But is it, the next question that I have here, and this really goes to the question of the media. And when you think about the media, the question is, does the media in any way promote or not the issues of racism as you have seen them unfold during your lifetime?
Well, you know, media can help and media can hurt. When we started the bus boycott, we thought we didn't want any media. So we were not interested in letting the white people know about it. But E.D. Nixon, going back to Nixon, had a relationship with Joe Asbell, who was a reporter for the Montgomery Advertiser. That was a local paper in Montgomery. So E.D., without telling any of us, leaked to the press the fact that black folks are going to stay off of the buses on Monday. And guess what? On Monday morning, and it may be on Sunday, the headlines of the paper is blacks telling blacks to stay off of the bus on Monday. And you know what? It was the best thing ever happened to us. people who didn't get the message got the message. On the other hand, as leaders, you have to be careful that you don't let the media govern what you do and how you do it, because they can end up ruining you as well as helping you. So it's not an either or. If you get the right kind of media, if the media is on the right side, and what we consider the right side, because other people don't consider that the right side, it's different. But you just have to be careful in how you deal with it.
Thank you. One last subject matter, and this is one that's a function of the election, and it's certainly for us lawyers is a huge issue, but I think for everyone should be a huge issue, and that is the Supreme Court and the future of the court. What's your sense now that the Trump people will be in a position to select one or more justices over the next several years, perhaps? How do you think that's going to affect this whole issue of trying to deal with the questions of racism that you've articulated?
I think depending on the justices that the new president will make, of a lot of the law as we know it today. And it could be devastating. On the other hand, if they, and this didn't happen with Mr. Justice Thomas, I was hoping it would have, but it has not, and I don't think there's any hope of it happening. But then you may end up, they may appoint somebody like a Hugo Black, who at one time had some identification with the Ku Klux Klan, who ended up being one of the most advocates of human and civil rights of any justice. If you had a justice who is worth his or her salt, once you get on the bench, and regardless of how you got there, and once you realize that this position is larger than I am, then there may be some hope that even some of these ultra-conservatives that may be appointed may end up doing the right thing. Let's pray that that happens.
One last subject matter, and that is, I know that you have been an ordained minister for a number of years, even early in your career and throughout your career. How have you been able to balance this practice that you have that's so extensive and demanding with that of being a minister?
Well, actually, the church that I'm a member of is a somewhat conservative church, and they believe, but at the same time, my Christian beliefs, while I have kept them separate and distinguished from my legal career, it has governed my activities. I don't have to accept every case that comes by, and there's some cases I wouldn't accept. Even though the person may have a meritorious case, it may be one that I feel I should not handle, and I may even recommend to that person another lawyer to handle it. Because when you have something, and I told the young people that I was talking to earlier today from the center, if you have something above your own beliefs or your own personal interests that you can look forward to that guides you, whether you call it a supreme being or whether it's God or whether it's Jesus Christ or whatever it is, if you have something greater than you that helps to govern your activities, then that's fine. But I also think, on the other hand, and that is that the matter of religion is a matter separate and distinct. and that judges on the court needs to interpret the Constitution according to the Constitution as a living document and not necessarily one that will cater to or be against any particular religious group or any other faith. So for me, I didn't have any problems at all with being able to adjust the two, because if I felt that it violated my own religious views, I don't have to handle the case. Somebody else can handle it.
Thank you. So, Mr. Gray, on behalf of the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris lecture series, I want to personally extend a personal thank you for your efforts here tonight and really enlightening us to the historical significance and the development of the civil rights movement, some of which we probably had not heard before. You truly are a giant. I knew that before, and I'm pleased to be able to participate and allow you to express yourself to this audience, who I'm certainly have been impressed by what you've had to communicate. So for all of you, I'd like to for you to give another round of applause to Mr. Gray. Now, we do have off to the left Mr. Gray's book, Bus Ride to Justice. It is there. It has been, I believe, signed. Many of them have been signed, and so you're all welcome to stay around to be set up, and you can purchase the book. I have read the book. It is a wonderful book, and it gives you even more enlightened discussions about many more events that he was involved in. His life truly is a journey. A life well committed to social justice, and so you all should, if possible, have an opportunity to buy it and to read it. It would be important. So thank all of you for coming. Thank you for participating. Thank you. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Shake hands. Come on, shake hands.